Welcome, Joan, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm looking so forward to hearing from you and your book and all of the knowledge that you have to share with us. Let's start first with where in the world are you tuning in from?
So I'm in Ojai, California, small mountain town, and I'm living my dream. I haven't been here for most of my life. I was in New York, where I was born and raised in Queens, and I went away to school but came back to work, so I spent most of my life there. And at a certain point, it occurred to me that what I loved more than anything were mountains and animals and nature, and that was hard to come by in Manhattan.
That would be, yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. So you wanted that space and you wanted that beauty. And so
Yeah.
therefore you took a
And
leap.
it took some time. My husband and I both had to find jobs here. So,
Fine.
it took actually about 5 years of coming and spending our vacation month and really looking. But here we are. Yeah, very happy.
Wow.
I have chickens and dogs,
Wow.
I just came back from a long hike.
Big city gal gone out to the country. Beautiful.
Exactly, exactly
Oh,
the
I love
story.
that. I love
Yeah.
that. You know, we have dreams like this, and whenever I meet a person who follows those dreams, I'm always so inspired. So beautiful work
Well,
there.
I feel like I had a lot of help from psychoanalysis, and
Okay.
I want to share what I learned there because I think it can, even knowing about psychoanalysis can help everyone. You don't even you don't even have to uh, go 3 times a week. Um, you can learn some of the techniques and ideas, and it's very helpful, I think.
Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing about that, June, because, sorry, Joan, because what I have been working on myself is I am in my practicum for my counseling. And so psychoanalysis is something I'm fascinated by. So tell me more about what brought you to this subject, and then maybe just for our listeners who don't quite know what it is, also let us in on what that
Yeah.
is.
Do you know, most people don't know what it is. Even I did a kind of survey. I would stop people in the street and on my hiking trails and ask them if they knew the difference between psychoanalysis and therapy. And the only people who really knew were therapists like
Yeah, fine.
yourself. Um, Regular people did not know the difference. I mean, and I think I didn't either. I didn't even know, I barely knew what therapy was when I started out. And what the difference is, therapy, really good therapy, helps you understand what why you make the choices you make and what your problem patterns are and how to really look a little more deeply into what you're doing and why. And psychoanalysis continues that. It's on a continuum. It goes, s- a lot of people, not a lot actually, but there are people who've had a lot of trauma in their early life. And I'm here to say you do not have to have been locked in a basement or beaten by an alcoholic uncle to have trauma. It can be in very ordinary households like mine. And I'll talk
Really?
about that. I'll explain it. But
Hmm.
when therapy is not enough and you can feel yourself going only so far and and you're symptomatic in ways that I was, insomnia, um, restless leg. Many other people have headaches, stomach aches, all kinds of problems. And when you can't get at it through therapy, which is really aimed at problem solving, then it's time for a deeper dive. And
Okay.
the way that that happens is through tapping into your unconscious, which you don't do as much in regular therapy.
Fine.
Sometimes you don't do it all. And that's okay if that works. But if it doesn't, then how do you get to your unconscious? Through dreams, through slips of the tongue, uh,
Mm.
specifically in something called transference, which is how you project onto your therapist. What emerges between the two of you, and that becomes a very delicate, important, central aspect of what you're learning. And with in regular therapy, you don't really do that. The therapist is there to support you, to help you tease things out. This is a
Mhm.
different enterprise. This is about really not even realizing the relationship you're forming when you get frustrated with that therapist, when you are angry, when you find yourself feeling, as I often did, frightened, if I thought she was not tuned into me. Um, and this is the
Mhm.
way you discover what the deeper patterns are that you bring into your life that you're not even aware of. And it takes time. But
Mhm.
for me, well, I mean, I think actually my story is very typical. I started psychoanalysis never having heard of it. I knew nothing, but I was 27 years old and living with a partner, and I would be waking up twice and three times a week screaming with the same nightmare over and over in different, slightly different, theme, same theme, different specifics. And it didn't even occur to me that there was anything weird about that until my partner said, people don't wake up screaming three times a week. You ought to see it. You ought to see somebody. And that's how I went to therapy, not knowing the difference between therapy and psychoanalysis. But my therapist, who, sort of began in the way all therapy begins, problem solving and so on. And then little by little, I started to tell her about these nightmares that my partner was really sick of hearing about. And, um, and that's when therapy turned into psychoanalysis
Mm.
because she began to focus on what this dream was. What's in this dream? In regular therapy, you don't have really the time to dive into that. And here, this became the center because this is really what was coming up over and over and over from my unconscious for, at that point, years.
Wow.
And she she listened. We couldn't figure it out. It was always about a few people, just two or three people who would chase me to kill me. And I would fight them, but they would have an injection of some chemical that would drain me of my power. Well, what's that about? I told her that nobody
Mm.
had ever hurt me in my childhood. Nobody ever gave me an injection except for an occasional penicillin shot. There was nothing that really made sense. And she had me go and interview my brother, my mother, and little by little, as I began asking questions about my early childhood, as a matter of fact, my therapist started asking me questions about my early childhood. I knew nothing. I didn't even know why I didn't know anything. And then it all emerged that when I was 2, my father died of cancer. He was a young man, and it's just one of those horrible things that can
Mm.
happen. My
Yeah.
mother was 26 years old, 2 little babies, really didn't know how to handle it, had to go to his funeral and a week later get a full-time job to support us and leave us with, the cheapest babysitter she could find. And things were very, very difficult. And by the time I was 5, she remarried, and we moved from our little three-room apartment where my father had died to a brand new apartment um, in Queens, New York, where we didn't bring even a picture of this former father as we were getting a new father. And I say that kind of, you can hear a kind of contempt in my voice. Isn't that ridiculous? But I have a lot of compassion for her trying to make a new life, and she believed that children wouldn't remember. They didn't understand what was, this is what she told me. You were a child, you didn't know what was going on. Well, turns out my
Mm.
unconscious knew exactly what was going on and registered all of it in this dream. And little by little, I found out from my mother that we lived in a 3-room apartment, tiny little 3-room apartment, and in the kitchen she would prepare morphine injections that she had to give him because we couldn't even afford a hospital. She had to nurse him at home until he wasted away and died. And I watched her prepare those needles, bring them to him. And as soon as I had that piece of information, it still didn't occur to me. But when I told my
Mhm.
therapist, she turned into the psychoanalyst she was studying to be. And that's when
Wow.
we took off into psychoanalysis.
Hmm.
And she leapt on it. She said, "That's it. Those are the needles, Joan." And
Wow.
I said, "That's ridiculous. I don't know anything about, I didn't know about my early childhood. I didn't even know, I barely knew I had a father who died. Somewhere somebody must have mentioned, but that's all I knew. I didn't know his name. And
Wow.
well, my mother thought she was protecting us.
Right.
And
Hmm.
the new stepfather that she brought was a sweet, nice man.
Hmm.
They were good people. They did what they could to raise children,
Hmm.
and this was. But you can't, it turns out, just bury things with children. You
Fine.
really
Yeah.
can't. They register them. And I think all of us know that when we've had many, many people have families where certain things are never discussed. And
Okay.
that was my family.
Yeah.
That whole first 5 years of our lives, that they were never discussed. They never happened. Um, I I discovered in my mother's drawer 3 pictures of this father with my brother and me. And that it like my head came off. It was so amazing to see this. But she explained to me that children think in black and white terms, little children. And I
Yeah.
was only 2. And the
Hmm.
story I made up in my mind is like a fairy tale where my mother was slowly killing my father, who had been a hardy man. The picture I found of him had me on his shoulders. He was
Yeah.
a big, strong man with his little baby girl on his shoulders, and he faded away and disappeared. In my
Mhm.
mind, my this is my analyst now speaking. I
Right.
was terrified of that my mother would do this to me, that
Right.
she would come at me with a needle, and that I would waste away and die. And what was going on in the household was my mother
Mhm.
was devastated and she
Yeah.
withdrew emotionally.
Hmm.
So, in my mind, my mother became unreachable and scary,
Hmm.
hence this nightmare. And this
Right.
is an example of what you really can't get to. Now, I didn't even believe any of it. I said, "Oh, this is, I don't know. And why would she kill me? She was my mother. She took care of me," which she did. And she said, "That's not how little children, pre-verbal children think." Well, I was skeptical, but guess what? My nightmares disappeared. And
Wow.
and I discovered my unconscious. I didn't know I had one. Most
Hmm.
people don't.
Nope.
And and it that's how it manifested for me. And then
Hmm.
I was absolutely amazed and ready to go further because I really did understand how much was down there. This whole story, which was very complicated, and I won't go into it, my father's family, his life with us, why we never knew his family. Where did they disappear to? You know, didn't they want to see their grandchildren and so on? So all of that, she would send me back more interviews with cousins I had never met before. And my whole past emerged over a
Wow.
period of years. I mean, it took a long time because
Of
she
course.
was pacing it at the rhythm of what I could handle. This was
Right.
all very big, and my brother and I would talk about it, and it bonded us even more. He was older, so he actually knew more. He was 7 when my father died, so he could tell me,
Oh,
and previously, we would never talk about it because it was taboo, and
right.
suddenly it became something that our family could talk about. And I think my mother was very protective of the new stepfather, and he had very bad asthma, and he could not live with us when he first moved into the house where my father died. And he was told by the asthma experts to move into a new apartment with nothing from this former man who was obviously feeling, he was feeling overwhelmed by, and that would be the best thing for him. So he needed to have this first father disappear in order for his asthma not to flare up. And I guess for him to feel secure that my mother would love him. And
Right.
yeah, there's a whole family drama right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's psychoanalysis. And
Mm,
little by little, this all emerged. I learned what my childhood was. As I learned how, and the whole thing is not for blame. People think it's about blaming your mother. It's about really understanding what was the impact on me. How did I, as a child, feel about all of this? You know,
right.
most households often they don't know how to help children express their grief, their fear, their needs, and the parents just decide this is how we'll do it. Well, if that doesn't meet the child's inner life, it's gonna just stay in there and really fester, and it will
Totally.
express itself through the body, through
Hmm.
the bad choices you make over and over again. Um, and that's what I discovered. And once I discovered this, it changed my life. It
Hmm.
gave me a sense of who I was. It gave me a sense of rootedness that I never had. Um, I was no longer scared all the time of what might come out of my brain that I didn't understand. Um, and I think the first thing is I started to understand how scared I was. Now, mind you, I was very high achieving. I was very brazen in my life. I took tremendous risks and often succeeded. Um, you wouldn't know. I didn't know that I was a fearful person because we have masks upon masks, defenses upon defenses. And I think that when you can't get at those through therapy, there's this other set of skills that another kind of, well, a psychoanalyst can bring to your life. Um, and I think people feel that there's something hidden and strange, and it's very exotic, but it's really, as I say, just a continuation of therapy. Let's keep going. Let's go deeper. Let's get in there.
Hmm.
And it seems like, oh, it's only accessible to a few people who can afford $1 million, worth of therapy. But my therapist was just getting her certificate, and
Mhm.
she recorded our sessions so that she could go over them with a supervisor. Well, since she wasn't really a certified psychoanalyst yet, that my sessions were $25 a session, and
Perfect.
there are institutes throughout America, in every city, and in some smaller uh, cities too, where there are people being trained to be psychoanalysts, and you can get an analyst in training for a much lesser fee because they need to learn. And then you're getting not only a very dedicated young analyst, but maybe his or her supervisor as well.
Mhm.
So you're getting a lot of skill brought to whatever your problems are, and that's available. And then there are psychoanalysts who save one or two slots for people on Medicare, um, Medicaid. A friend of mine found, right here in our area, someone who was happy to take her on Medicaid, and she's now in her second year, and it's changing her life. It took her about 6 months to find someone because those slots get taken quickly. But if you're persistent, you definitely can find people um, who want to work with, they don't only want to work with people who have all the money in the world. So it's out there. And
Ah.
then there's a corollary, which is you can read about psychoanalysis
Mhm.
and learn about your unconscious and how it works in your life. So I call this, you can psychoanalytic ideas, and you can take them yourself and work with them yourself. And the the big takeaway, if you will, would be to look at some behavior that you're upset about, something, that you feel it's not quite right. Maybe you're stuck in something. Maybe you see a pattern of behavior that you don't like, or frustrations that turn into anger that don't make any sense. Why did I get so angry about that? Why do I always get so angry? Um, or why am I so fearful? What's going on here? If you begin with really even an incident, it's best if you have an incident. So I'll give you an example from my life. This is after my psychoanalysis when I was in my 20s. That concluded. When that concluded, she gave me a base of understanding who I was and what I wanted that allowed me to find my partner in life for the rest of my life, my husband. We found each other. I don't think that would have been possible earlier. I was not choosing the kinds of people that I could have a lasting relationship with. And
Right.
I also found really, really committed to my profession. I understood I wanted to write. I understood, basic things that I really hadn't known about myself. So I went forth into my the rest of my life. But then when I was older and settled and my daughter is already a teenager, I saw signs that this was not, I was still having something was still in there that was really scaring me, and I was behaving weirdly. So when my daughter becomes a teenager, well, that's always a difficult situation. Teenagers.
Fine.
And I realized I was constantly in an interaction with her where I would give in to her, and I was about to give in to her on something that I think would have been dangerous for her. Um, I'm sure of it because I couldn't say no. And I really didn't understand why, what was this? And I started again with a therapist who was a psychoanalyst and who began, and she said to me, "What would you lose if you said no? What are you afraid of?" And she really pushed me. Now, we had had some time, so she knew me enough. And I blurted out, I don't even know where this came from. She wouldn't love me anymore. And
Mm.
that was the key. As my analyst said, children love their parents. I was a good parent, you know, I am a good parent. Children love, maybe she's going to be angry at me, you know, maybe she won't speak to me for a week, but and I began to see that I was projecting onto my own daughter because she really questioned me. I took me down deeper, deeper, deeper. The very feelings I had about my own mother. If you remember back to my own childhood, when my
Mhm.
mother kind of disappeared, even though she was present, she was suddenly away at work every day for at least 9 hours a day with a commute. And she was also exhausted and in deep mourning when she was with my brother and me. And that doesn't make for a happy, engaged mother. And
No.
so in my little kid mind, I was afraid all the time that she wouldn't love me anymore. She wouldn't come back. She wouldn't, I would lose her because I was losing her. In a way, I had lost something elemental about a mother-child relationship. And and I think that that was profound. Profound. It was the first time I realized not just my daughter, but if a friend didn't call me back, if my husband was away too long, I would go into this deep fear place. And that's psychoanalytic thinking. That's where what I do for myself now, to go down into what am I afraid of here? Why am I so angry here? And to really sit with it and take it back to your childhood. What does this remind you of? What incident? You only have to come up with one image, and that will take you, that will open a door because that image, whatever it is you remember, for example, I remember, and this is what I remembered through my second analysis, being a little girl, 4 years old, knocking on the door of the girl who lived downstairs to play. She had invited me to play. And then she wouldn't open the door. And she and another little kid were laughing from behind the door. And I was just standing there, lost, not knowing what to do, not knowing anything. Now, this sounds to me, it always sounded to me like, why do I remember that? You know, what's important about that? Well, my analyst told me what's important about that. And if you, on your own, without an analyst, really let yourself remember what that felt like, there are a bunch of components. A, there was nobody to help me. There was no mother at home to run to make it better. You know, they're there, it's going to be okay. She was a mean, whatever we say, that there was no comfort, there was no understanding, there was rejection, and I'm lost and alone. Well, those feelings, if you can stay with them, whatever that one childhood incident was, you discover who you are now as well. That something in the present, like that exchange with my daughter, is taking you back to that childhood where you felt alone, lost,
Mhm.
unsupervised. Now, I didn't know I felt those things until I really applied psychoanalytic thinking to, my exchange with my daughter.
Mhm.
And once you can bring it to consciousness, then you have a chance to really, you know, change it, look at it. Um, and I did really understand after that. She'll get mad at me and then she'll come back, you know.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure
that's,
that's what happened.
yeah. And a therapist can help you just with the, you know, don't worry about it so much. But a psychoanalyst is going to help you understand what's, as I call it, what's tangled in there. What got tangled. And hence my book Untangling, because I feel like
Ah.
that's what psychoanalysis did. It untangled me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Listening, I've had the imagery the whole time of peeling back the curtain, peeling back
Yeah,
the
yeah,
cover
that's right.
behind, the isms that we all have,
That's
and
right.
some of the different subconscious programs and beliefs
That's
that
right.
we have, attached. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And so you decide after having this such amazing experiences, difficult experiences, hard experiences, childhood experiences that really shaped you. You've gone through all the psychoanalysis, many years in the making, and now you've thought, "Hey, I'm going to write a book." What was that process like for you to dive into the research?
Right. Well, I think I wrote it truly out of astonishment for the skill and I mean, I was in awe of what these two therapists did. And I really wanted to pay tribute to
Fine.
this practice. And, psychoanalysts write articles for one another, but we don't get to hear about, I mean, there are, I can count on one hand the books that people have written about psychoanalysis, and usually they're um, angry about it didn't work. There are very few. And I wanted to write the book that said, this is available to you. This is your own unconscious. And if I had had this book, how much sooner would I have gotten help? How much more would I have understood on my own what was going on in my life? Um,
Okay.
even our positive things. My mother, for all she lacked in a kind of like um, maternal maternalness, she wasn't very warm and cuddly. She was tough and strong and went back out into the world and did what she had to do to put a roof over her head. And I took on from her, I learned from her a lesson that went with me um, all my life. Don't trust anybody else. Depend on yourself. Be tough, you know, which is great. It got me a long way, but um, it didn't help with all of
And
my own needs for, um, you know, partnering and friendship. And she really didn't. She had a couple of friends in her life that I observed, and she depended on no one. You
right.
um,
Right.
so, I don't know that I was aware of that ism, the rugged individualist ism that I had inherited from her until I had an analyst who really could help me see that.
Yeah.
Um, so that's
Well,
another untangling.
fine. And I think about, your mother, perhaps if she had a psychoanalyst, she might be able to get to the bottom of this rugged independence.
Oh, yes.
Why that?
Well, it's interesting. My mother, of course, she grew up in poverty, and the idea she could have gotten welfare when my father died, what was
Mm.
then called welfare. She could have gotten help of some sort from the government. She could have gone to a psychologist. She could have got those things did not exist. That for her meant that you were not strong.
Right.
And even if she had heard of, I don't know that she even understood she could get financial help from the government, being having little babies and being without any kind of income. She wouldn't have taken it. She would not have made that choice. She was it was not part of her culture. So she was alone. And she unfortunately, her family couldn't help her. The
Yeah.
way she described it to me was her mother didn't speak English. She was illiterate. She couldn't take the public transportation because you have to be able to read and know your stop, um, or be able to speak English. And she couldn't get to us to help us. Well, that there's another story there that I won't go into, but this is a family that could have helped and didn't, and that tells you volumes right there.
Truly.
They didn't have a cohesive sense of family in the same way that I do now. And I was able
Mhm.
to create that, my brother and I, because we valued family. He just moved to the small, he and his wife moved, and daughter, my niece, we all live in the same small town now. And
Oh,
we just last night were celebrating family, you know. Oh my God, we have a family, and it sounds so simple, but for us it wasn't so simple. We were pretty
yeah,
alone in a lot of ways. Yeah.
certainly. Oh, well, congratulations on this beautiful family that you have created.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely, Joan. One thing that I've really noticed throughout our conversation today is you have an incredible capacity for compassion.
Thank you.
Truly. Yes,
I
truly.
think I think that is from psychoanalysis, because if
Okay.
you can understand yourself and understand how hurt you were by things that happened in your early life, you can also understand, I can see what hurt my mother. I can see what hurts other people,
Mhm.
and I can really feel for them. I mean, my poor stepfather, he didn't know what he was getting into, and um, he was um, just so at the mercy of his asthma, which was emotionally, the attacks would come on with emotional experiences, and he was not even he didn't have a clue. So how much it would have helped him um, to
Truly.
yeah, to have therapeutic help and understand what was going on in his deepest self. Yeah.
Absolutely. Another thing I really enjoy about the psychoanalyst approach is that you can, for example, for men who don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about emotions per se,
Yes.
it's a little
Yes.
bit more clinical, and that's kind of nice, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yes.
To not necessarily have to talk about, well, how do you feel about that? And yes, you're going to have these profound emotional moments, especially when you're digging into kind of the inner child work and those
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
And those are going to be profoundly emotional. But that being said, it still is a little bit more of an investigative sort
Yeah.
of tone to it, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. My first analysis I called my Sherlock Holmes analysis,
That's
because it
fine. Yeah.
was
Yeah.
it was a mystery that was being
Hmm.
uncovered every day. So there's that level. But what a big thing that happens is you begin to discover your most vulnerable self, whether you're a man or a woman. But by the time you discover it, you're ready. So even if a man starts out being like, you know, very cerebral and investigative, at a certain point, when they're comfortable, they too will be introduced to their most vulnerable, inner, fearful, um, whatever it is that's going on for them. But often by that time, they feel connected enough to their analyst and supported enough that they're ready to make that step, to take that step. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious when it comes to your book, then, what are we learning as the reader? What will we learn about ourselves? Is it a dive into what is the subconscious? Is it a dive into how to do our own investigative work? What will we learn?
So essentially, I use my own two psychoanalyses to
Mhm.
illustrate all the different parts. Part one is just a story. That's the Sherlock Holmes story because it's kind of a page turner. You know,
I
I didn't, I
bet.
only gave you the first little part of it, but to
Yeah.
discover, we're discovering this strange and enormous family and
Mm.
its dynamic. And that's one part. Part two is where I really break it down into different elements of psychoanalysis. So I have a chapter called Transference 101 and another one called Advanced Transference. So I explain all about transference and how I mean, you have transferences, everybody does all the
Certainly.
time.
Mhm.
When, and what that is how you bring um, memories of someone similar, let's say, to your boss, and maybe project onto her um, parts of a friend you trusted absolutely until you realize, maybe this isn't the person I should trust. Absolutely. I have to get to know her. And that's a projection. That's transference. Um, or maybe you project onto a boyfriend um some incredible need for a father
Mm.
and you don't even realize it until you're a year in. And that's transference. So I think I think that and the people I chose initially um were kind of like my mother, super independent, and they really couldn't, you know, they couldn't make a forever bond um,
Mm.
with me, you know. Um, and I think that we we can use these. I mean, I'm talking specifically about transference, but there are other aspects of psychoanalysis, and I essentially devote a chapter to each one, where you're learning about what's resistance. You know,
Mm.
my husband, we just got a new dog, and when I brought up getting a second dog because our second dog died, his first response is, I don't want a dog. I don't want to do this. Nothing new.
Mm.
And we talked about it with great understanding about where that resistance comes from in him. No, I don't want to try anything new. And and instead of just saying, being angry, I want a
Mhm.
dog and you don't, to really understand what the desires are from, including my own, why do I need to get a second dog?
Right.
We have one wonderful dog. Why isn't that enough? And I have an obligation to go into my deepest self and understand what that craving is. And I did explain to him clearly, I want to make more of a family. I want us to be a pack. And three doesn't seem to be a pack to me, maybe because it wasn't such a feeling of a pack when I was a little girl with just my mother and my brother. That
Very good
I
self-awareness.
wanted, I wanted the all four. And he needed to go back and understand in his response that he almost always resists the new and what he's afraid of, and he really had to look at that. So we're using psychoanalytic thinking instead
Mm.
of just having an argument about you always get what you want, and I want I want another dog, and um, you know, so
Yeah,
it's that. I think and that's a chapter on resistance, really. So if you
that's it.
see, I'm trying to do these different
Mhm.
ideas that you can use.
I can really see in real time how your work has created even more compassion, as we spoke about, in terms of, for example, in relationships, you're able to react with curiosity
Yes,
rather than reactivity,
yes,
to things like resistance, because you have a different mind now. The connection is, so why? Let's learn about
exactly.
this. Let's pull back that curtain or
Yeah,
untangle that web.
yeah. And what's so
Mm,
wonderful is you get to understand each other better and yourselves. I never thought
truly.
before about, well, why do I want a second dog? You
Yeah,
know?
fine. Yeah.
And I discovered, and we worked out a deal that I think is psychoanalytically interesting. Um, he he really does, he didn't want to take on more work. So I said, it's worth it to me because I'm so motivated. I'll do the work of the second dog if you can open your heart to the dog. And he really came to the place where, yes, he could do that. Um, and we've only had the dog one day, but it looks like it's going to work out that way. And
That's exciting.
yeah, and I mean, this is such a little thing, but it's the
Yeah.
little things in our lives that can hook us in
Hmm.
to suddenly disagreements and explosions and angers
Hmm.
because we don't know what's underneath them,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm. Yeah.
And my husband has some real ambivalence because I mean this is so beautiful in his thinking that he could admit this. His father got a dog supposedly for him, but it was really for himself when my husband was a little boy, and it was very clear to him that his father loved the dog more than him. And
Oh,
right, and he had some fears that I would fall in love with the dog, which of course is happening, and um and maybe I wouldn't love him as much. Maybe I wouldn't be as available for him.
yeah.
Now, I mean, that's a deeper, fuller level of understanding your partner and yourself. And,
Mhm.
it all came from this seemingly superficial argument, you
Right.
know?
Certainly, I was just speaking to a relationship and conflict coach, and he spoke is about exactly that. There's always a deeper meaning behind the small conflicts,
That's right.
and we communicate more with our energy than with our words, more than anything else in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just couldn't agree more, and so in this experience, it really illustrates that, how that something beyond, a little deeper was there, was present, and that, but reacting with that curiosity in that psychoanalytic approach, you were able to get a little bit more clarity.
Well, and energy, I'm glad you used that term because I could feel the energy of resistance beyond any particular
Mm,
about the choice. And I was
okay.
responding to that, to just this kind of like stop sign. Um,
Yeah.
and it's different. It's different from uh, a really, just thoughtful, understandable, I don't want a dog. You, you
Right.
know, so you
Yeah.
feel when there's something more going on, I think.
Yeah.
And
True.
and he felt also in me that there was what is it you want here? Why isn't
Hmm.
it, why isn't Tallulah enough? Tallulah's our first dog.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, legitimate question.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool. I absolutely
Yeah,
love it. And I wanted to note about your book. I too wrote a memoir, and the first part is the story, and the second part is educational. And so great work there. What I really appreciate about books written that way is one, we get to know you. We get to know you and
yeah,
your
yeah,
story.
yeah.
I think that we as humans really run on stories. We love
That's
stories.
right.
Like I know I've been captivated this whole time because you're telling me stories. And then we also benefit from education. And
Yeah,
so I love how you lead into a kind of a beginner's overview
yeah.
of this really important work that isn't quite so clinical. So, for
That's
example,
right. That's
yeah,
right.
for example, when I'm going through my textbooks, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm getting tired, citations and this and that, whatever else. And it can be so clinical that you lose it in the shuffle. Whereas for you,
Yeah,
you're giving us a really beginner outlook on, and like you've got some deeper chapters too, you've mentioned, where we can really kind of palpate using your story
that's
and
right.
this education how to bring this into our own world. So
Yeah.
great work there.
Yeah, and I didn't do it consciously. In
Mm,
fact, I was in my last 2 years of my own psychoanalysis,
mm.
and I was writing to my analyst in the night because that's when my insomnia and that's when I had that's when I was in touch with my fear. So I
Wow.
decided to at least write about it, and that's when she said to me, have you ever thought about writing about psychoanalysis? Because I've written books before. I've written several books,
Wow.
and and I knew immediately. I said, I think about it every night. That's what I
Yeah.
think about. How do I express to you what's going on for me in these crazy nights that I have?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I think that was the beginning. And I began to write. And because I'm a writer, I began at the beginning with the story of being 27 years old, not having a clue what I was getting myself into, and having my world open up with all of this work that was so worth it to me. Um,
Wow.
and and the first, it's also very interesting because the first analysis is kind of classic Freudian, the kind we kind of know. The second analysis is called relational. It's entirely
Oh.
different. And when I illustrate what transference is and so on,
Mhm.
it's in a different kind of analysis. So you get to see very different approaches because, I mean, I think they
Oh.
get you to the same place, but one might work better. The relational approach worked better for me. It got me
Mm.
deeper because a- my problems were relational.
Yeah.
I was like
Most of the
my
time, human
mother.
beings are.
Yeah. I mean, like my mother, I just kept distances and, so that was really challenging for me and really exciting. Um, so, each person might pick a different way of going in. Um,
Mm. Mhm.
and you do this with therapists too. I always recommend if you're going to get a therapist or a counselor or a psychoanalyst, interview at least 3 people. And then you're making a choice. You're not just going with the first person who may be wonderful for you, but maybe isn't really the right approach for you. And you're not going to get a sense of it until you see different approaches and different personalities. And I think, I mean, I've always done that myself. Even just that first time when I was 27, my mother was a comparative shopper, and I applied.
Fine.
Yeah, she would always go to like 3 stores before she made her decision because this was her hard-earned money.
Fine.
And I thought, this is my hard-earned money, and
Mhm.
I shopped and concluded. I mean, it really was very revealing, 3 different people and what they seemed to offer me. Um,
Okay.
So yeah, I would recommend that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Joan, for all of your information that you've shared with us today. Where can people find your book if they're wanting a little bit more information?
On Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, online, and it's in Kindle and book form. And
Okay.
yes, and I you can also get there through my website, which is untanglingjoan.com.
Wonderful. I
Um,
love the names for that, Joan. I will link all of that in the show notes so that people can connect with you. I
thank you.
personally am fascinated to take a look at your book and
Great.
learn a little bit more about psychoanalysis. So thank you again for coming on and for sharing all of your knowledge with us. We're all really deeply grateful for the knowledge you've shared today.
Thank you so much for your interest and your curiosity and your wonderful questions. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.